Now, fairy tales have traditionally been used for more than entertaining children. They've also played a role in teaching morality and kindness to kids. Well, that tradition is being upheld in a new book by ethicist Simon Longstaff.
The Spider's Song it's aiming for adults and children alike and teaching them the value of nature, acceptance, humanity and friendship. Simon Longstaff joins us now. Welcome, Simon.
Good morning.
Okay, so what prompted you to write this book?
I'd love to say it was a really lofty idea, but it wasn't. I wrote this book 22 years ago, actually,
right.
when my son Alexander was born, and then
Yep.
it developed it further when Cassandra, my daughter, was born. Put it away in the bottom drawer, and it was purely by accident that somebody asked if I hadn't any unpublished works, and I pulled this out, and they said they wanted to publish it. So I hadn't even read it to my children, so the first time they saw it was when it turned up in this book.
Wow, 22 years in the making. Let's all have a look in our dusty bottom drawers, shall we?
But hang on, they're now
You'll never know. They're now adults.
Are they still appreciating the fact
I think
that
they
you
are.
wrote them
I mean,
that story?
for me, it was an emotional thing, really. I mean, I was trying to think, what could I ever give my children that was truly a part of me, other than the fact that they're alive, of course. And I thought, well, if I could conceive of a story, because I love writing and have quite a good imaginative life, I thought that would be something special. But I never thought it would be as splendid as it's turned out to be.
Well, there we see also the illustrations there, don't we, which add another level to the book.
That genius guy called Mark van der Green, who I've worked with for almost 20 years, he's based in London and I'm based here, so yeah, it's been wonderful the way he's done
A
it.
lovely collaboration. The Spider's Song.
Yes.
What can you tell us about how you actually encapsulate the issues that this touches on in terms of friendship and nature and what have you?
Well, you captured it in the introduction. It's a fairy tale. It's a modern time fairy tale with little bits of Lewis Carroll thrown in and a few other things. It's got a mysterious hidden world. It's a little girl and a spider that fall into it. And it's also about how quick we can be to either be arrogant in what we think we can do as human beings and simply make everything better because of our technologies, which is what this character called the Boffin thinks he's doing, but also how easy it is to misunderstand others. So the little girl Poppy, and I never quite know whether she's a really quite unpleasant little girl or whether or not she's just a properly frightened girl, she keeps thinking this fellow that he runs into is a monster. But he's just an old man, and and it's those sorts of things that happen. So yeah, it's got the level of I think it's a really interesting story that children will just enjoy at the level. But the best books for me in literature always have that other depth that you find when you're the adult reading it to the child.
And as you say, this idea came about over 2 decades ago. Is it still applicable today, particularly, I guess, given what we're going through right now and how uncertain the world is?
Yeah, I think it's actually remarkable. It's entirely an accident that it's so applicable, but it has some elements which I think are possibly timeless, and that's because I've borrowed very heavily on the things that have always been timeless in great stories for children, the fairy tales. We come back to them century after century, and I don't know if anybody will be reading The Spider's Song in 100 years' time, but I think if they did, they'll still find many of the things resonating there and children responding to it, plus the beauty in the pictures.
But is it fair to say it's a story of acceptance that, you have this young scientist who's trying to create his own perfect world?
Yeah.
But you're saying, well, that may be beneficial to begin with, but essentially there needs to be
what happens in
acceptance.
the story is that this fellow is, as you say, trying to create a perfect world. He locks himself away from the natural world completely. He fills it up with creatures which are entirely made by and animated by him. And eventually it starts to go wrong. Now, you'd think that ends to a dark ending, but it doesn't, because that world of science and technology and its imposition over nature, it's interfered with by this little spider and by this girl. And the conceit in the story is that spiders learn how to make their webs by learning a song which they're taught by their mother. Then, in a sense, they sing the webs into existence. And that's based on an idea that comes from the way in which carpets are made in many parts in the Arabic world, where they learn to sing the carpet into existence. And at the very end, what you find is that there's a marriage then between this kind of technological approach which has broken down and the world of art and nature. So the art comes from the hums of the girl, nature comes from the spider and the way she learns to sing another kind of song by listening to this little girl. And eventually, in a wonderful reconciliation, this man finds that he's not alone when the girl's left, because he sets her a task and eventually she's gone. But the spider chooses to remain, and they've made something new. So it's a kind of a synthesis of those two worlds in a way which I think is really quite an optimistic view. And that's what we need at this point. I mean, there is so much, as you say, transition and uncertainty. We should not lose heart and hope that things can be better if only we get the balance right.
And I note as well with the spider's character, an altruistic bent from this little creature. I mean, there's suspicion and misunderstanding on the sides of Boffin the scientist and Poppy the little girl, but the spider seems to be the one that reaches out, you know, initially to Poppy and helps, you know, weave a web that helps her to go back to her world. But also the spider stays in the end with Boffin in his little world.
She does. She recognises something in him that she can relate to, and she can, in a sense, help to rescue the better part. And I think the big debate, we have lots of talks about climate change and energy transitions and things. Sometimes below all that, I think there are these more fundamental stories about how we think of ourselves on the planet, how we relate to nature, and how it, in a sense, relates to us. It sustains us, really. And I don't invest nature with a kind of a mind necessarily that is as altruistic as the spider. That's a fiction. But I think we could learn something about how we live in the world. And that comes to me very much from some of my early experiences on places like Root Island and understanding through my kinship ties up there with the Anandaliakwa people, the nature that you are in a relationship, literally a kinship relationship with the rest of the natural world. It's not just a resource to be exploited.
Simon, I did want to take the opportunity, given you're an ethicist and...
children's author's hat off, philosopher on.
Well, in relation, of course, to Donald Trump having won the election and being the next president, and his, as a role model, which is inevitable as far as the US president is concerned, do you have concerns?
It's going to be partly to do with what he does. I think, as everybody's been said, it's very hard to predict exactly what he will do because there's been very many different aspects to his character emerge.
But not so much his policies.
No, as a person.
Just as a person.
But I think even
as a figurehead.
Even as a person, you see these different sides. I watched his acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention because I've been following it for a few days just to see what on earth was going on. And, you know, in the same time that he was actually attacking people, he was also speaking to this incredibly conservative audience about his support for people who are gay, you know. And I thought, gosh, how is he managing to do that at the same time? So that's what I say. It's not a simple narrative with Trump. I think he's a pretty complicated person, like most people are in this world. But if he goes to the kind of the stereotype of what he's built, that will be an unfortunate example because it would seem just like the easy way in which he might dismiss people. It's a cartoon character in a sense, you're fired. But what if it's the president doing it and saying, well, you're just another thing that can be dismissed? But the deeper issue, I think, is one that you've been talking about this morning, and that is there's something very fundamental that's gone on with Brexit, with Trump, with Duterte in the Philippines and here. There's some question. It's almost, you can imagine, like those results are a bit like an autoimmune disease where society keeps catching a fever but can't quite identify what is the thing right deep down that has to be addressed. And until we do that, I think this phenomenon will continue to emerge.
Well, let's hope the next generation gets on board with the spider's song.
Yeah, perhaps.
Simon Longstaff, wonderful to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.